Welcome. Find yourself a comfortable position and allow the concerns of the day to drift away for a time. Tonight, we journey back to Victorian England, to a world vastly different from our own, yet one that shaped the modern age in profound ways. We will descend into the darkness beneath the earth, venture into frozen Arctic wastes, contemplate the elaborate rituals of mourning, and finally settle into the warm parlor of a middle-class home. This is history that moves slowly, deliberately. There is no need to remember every detail, no test awaiting you at the end. Simply let these voices from the past wash over you, these glimpses into lives lived long ago. The rhythms of their days, so different from ours, yet fundamentally human in their struggles, their hopes, their daily routines. Imagine yourself stepping back through time, through the comfort of your present moment, into an era of gaslight and coal smoke, of rigid social structures and backbreaking labor, of scientific exploration and spiritual contemplation. An era that feels both impossibly distant and strangely familiar. Take a deep breath. Let your shoulders relax, and let us begin our journey into the past. You are 7 years old. Your name might be Joseph or Thomas or Mary, for girls work below ground too in these years. The world you know is divided into two realms, the brief hours above ground, where pale sunlight occasionally touches your face, and the long, endless hours below, in the darkness that has become your workplace, your prison, your entire universe for 12 hours at a time. It is still dark when you wake, before dawn has even considered breaking. Your mother shakes you gently. There is no luxury of sleeping until light appears. The cottage where your family lives is damp, the walls slick with moisture, a single room shared by you, your parents, and your 4 younger siblings. The breakfast, if it can be called that, consists of a piece of bread and perhaps a cup of weak tea. Your stomach rumbles, but this is not unusual. Hunger is a constant companion, a dull ache you have learned to ignore. Your father is already dressed, his face permanently darkened by coal dust that no amount of washing can fully remove. He is a hewer, one who cuts the coal from the seam. You will not see him again until tomorrow, for you work different shifts, your small body serving a different purpose in the vast underground machinery of extraction. The walk to the pithead takes 15 minutes through the pre-dawn darkness. Other families emerge from their cottages, a silent procession of shadows moving toward the colliery. The pithead itself is a landscape of industrial purpose. The winding gear that raises and lowers the cages, the coal heaps, the sorting areas where women and children pick through the extracted coal, the offices where the owners and managers work, though you have never entered those buildings and likely never will. You approach the cage, a wooden platform surrounded by metal railings, swaying slightly in the shaft. 20 or 30 people crowd onto it, pressed together. There is no safety gate, no careful loading procedure. The overseer shouts, and the cage begins its descent. Imagine the sensation, the sudden drop, your stomach lurching, the darkness of the shaft rushing past. The walls are close enough to touch, wet stone glistening in the faint light of the safety lamps. Down, down, down you go, dropping hundreds of feet beneath the surface. The air grows warmer, then cooler again. Water drips from above. The cage sways and bumps against the shaft walls. Some of the men talk quietly. The children are mostly silent, too tired or too afraid to speak. The descent takes perhaps 5 minutes, but it feels longer or shorter. Time operates differently in the mine. Finally, the cage jolts to a stop at the bottom. You step off onto the mine floor, which is uneven, muddy, slick with water and coal dust. The roof here is perhaps 8 feet high, but this is the main roadway. Where you will spend your day, the roof is much, much lower. The main roadway is a relatively wide tunnel, supported by timber props. Oil lamps flicker at intervals, creating pools of dim yellow light, separated by stretches of near total darkness. The air is thick, heavy with coal dust and the breath of men and children. You can hear the distant rhythmic sounds of picks striking coal, the rumble of coal tubs being pushed along rails, occasional shouts echoing down the tunnels. Your father and the other hewers head off toward their work faces, disappearing into side tunnels. You turn in a different direction, following a narrower passage that slopes downward. You are a trapper. This is your job, your purpose, the reason you are paid 3 pence per day. The passage narrows further. You must duck your head, then crouch, then crawl on hands and knees. The ceiling presses down, the walls close in. Finally, you reach your station, a ventilation door, a simple wooden barrier stretched across the tunnel. This door is crucial to the entire operation of the mine. The ventilation system depends on controlling the flow of air through carefully managed passages. Fresh air must reach the working faces where men cut coal. Dangerous gases, particularly the dreaded fire damp, methane that can explode with a single spark, must be diluted and carried away. Your door is one of dozens throughout the mine, each tended by a child like yourself, each one essential to keeping the air moving, keeping the miners alive. And so you sit. The tunnel here is perhaps 4 feet high. You cannot stand. There is a small hollow carved into the wall where you can huddle, legs pulled up to your chest, or sometimes stretch out if your back aches unbearably. The door is within arm's reach. When you hear the rumble of an approaching coal tub being pushed by a hurrier, a slightly older child or woman, you must quickly pull the rope to open the door, allow them to pass through, then immediately close it again to maintain the ventilation flow. But between these moments, and the tubs come irregularly, sometimes minutes apart, sometimes half an hour, you sit in darkness. Complete darkness. The overseer does not permit you to have a lamp. Lamps cost money for oil. Lamps create light that you do not need for your simple task. Lamps might be knocked over, might ignite gas, and so you sit in a darkness so absolute that you cannot see your hand when you hold it directly before your face. Imagine this darkness, not the darkness of a room at night, where your eyes adjust and shapes gradually emerge, not the darkness of closing your eyes. This is the darkness of being buried alive, of being sealed in stone, of existence without light. After a while, minutes, hours, you cannot tell, you begin to see things that are not there, shapes moving in the blackness, lights that flicker and vanish. Your mind, starved of visual input, begins to create its own images. The silence, too, is profound. Yes, there are sounds, the distant pick of hewers, the occasional rumble of a coal tub somewhere in the network of tunnels, the drip of water. But for long stretches there is only your breathing, the pounding of your heart, and a vast oppressive silence that seems to press against your eardrums. The cold is another enemy. The air down here is damp, hovering around 50 degrees. You are wearing the same thin clothing you wore above ground, rough trousers, a shirt that was once your older brother's, no shoes because shoes cost money, and you need your bare feet to feel the wet tunnel floor. The dampness seeps into your bones. You shiver, pulling your knees tighter to your chest, but the cold is inescapable. Water drips constantly from the ceiling, running down the walls, pooling on the floor. Sometimes you must sit in water several inches deep. Your feet go numb, your hands ache. The rheumatism that plagues so many miners and trapper children begins its work early, settling into your joints, a pain that will follow you for whatever years you have remaining. And then there are the rats. You hear them before you see them, squeaking, scratching, the patter of many feet in the darkness. The mine is infested with them. Generations of rats that have never seen daylight, sustained by the crumbs of food that miners bring below, by any organic matter they can scavenge, even by the bodies of ponies that die underground and are sometimes left where they fall. They are bold, these rats. They know you cannot see them. Sometimes you feel one run across your legs and you cry out, kicking blindly. Sometimes they bite. One boy you knew lost part of his ear to a rat bite in the darkness, and the wound became infected, and he died within a week, his body burning with fever, even as his family tried desperately to cool him with wet cloths. You have learned to keep very still when you hear them approaching. Sometimes you throw small pieces of coal to scare them away, but your supply of throwable objects is limited, and you are afraid of throwing your dinner by mistake. Your dinner. At some point during your shift, you judge the time by counting the coal tubs that pass, roughly estimating the hours you will eat. Your mother has wrapped a piece of bread and perhaps a small bit of cheese in a cloth. This is your food for 12 hours. You must ration it carefully, but the hunger is intense, gnawing, and often you eat it too quickly, leaving yourself with empty hours ahead and an empty stomach. The water you drink comes from a small bottle you carry, but this too runs out. When it does, you have no choice but to drink from the puddles on the tunnel floor. Water that tastes of coal dust and rust, and things you try not to think about. Many children suffer from stomach ailments, digestive troubles that leave them even weaker, even thinner. When a coal tub approaches, you hear it first, a rumbling, scraping sound growing louder in the tunnel. You reach for the rope, pulling hard to open the door. The hurrier emerges from the darkness, pushing or pulling a tub loaded with coal. Hurriers are typically between 8 and 15 years old, boys and girls both. Their job to move the cut coal from the workface to the main roadway. They are harnessed to the tubs with chains around their waists, crawling on hands and knees through passages sometimes only 2 feet high, pulling loads of coal that weigh hundreds of pounds. They barely acknowledge you. There is no time for conversation, no breath to spare. They push through, and you close the door behind them, and the darkness returns. Your existence is measured in these small events. A coal tub passing, a rat scurrying nearby, the sound of picks in the distance, the drip of water. Each minute stretches into an eternity. You have no watch, no way to mark time except by estimation and hope. 12 hours below ground feels like a lifetime. Sometimes you fall asleep. The exhaustion is so complete, the boredom so absolute, that despite the cold and the damp and the fear, your eyes close. But sleeping is dangerous. If you sleep through the approach of a coal tub and fail to open the door, the hurrier will report you to the overseer. Punishment is swift and certain, beatings with a strap, docked wages, perhaps dismissal from your position, which means your family loses income it desperately needs. And there are worse dangers. The mine is a place of constant peril. Explosions occur with horrifying regularity. Fire damp, when it accumulates in sufficient quantity, needs only a spark. From a pick striking stone, from a lamp, from static electricity to ignite. The explosion is instant, catastrophic. Men, women, and children are killed in seconds, their bodies burned beyond recognition, or crushed by collapsing tunnels, or suffocated by the afterdamp, the carbon monoxide that floods the mine following an explosion. Cave-ins are equally terrifying. The roof props, rough-hewn timber beams, can fail under the immense weight of the earth above. You have heard the stories, entire sections of the mine collapsing, burying hewers and hurriers alive. Sometimes rescue is possible, desperate digging to reach the trapped miners. Sometimes it is not, and the bodies remain below, entombed forever in the darkness. Flooding is another threat. Underground streams can break through unexpectedly, or accumulated water can suddenly pour down from old workings above. Children have drowned in rising water, trapped in low passages with no escape route. Even something as simple as a ventilation failure can be deadly. If the air stops flowing, carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide accumulate. Miners become disoriented, confused, then lose consciousness. The canaries that some mines keep as early warning systems, birds that succumb to gas before humans do, stop singing, then topple from their perches. You know all these dangers. Every child in the mine knows them, and yet you have no choice but to return, day after day, shift after shift, because your family needs the 3 pence you earn. Your father's wages as a hewer might be 8 shillings per week if he works hard, and the coal face is good. Your mother might earn a few pennies sorting coal at the surface. Your 3 pence per day, 18 pence per 6-day week, makes the difference between eating something approaching an adequate diet and starvation. The system that has placed you here is vast and impersonal. The coal owners, men you will never meet, require coal to be extracted as cheaply as possible. The coal fuels the factories, the steam engines, the great machines that are transforming Britain into the world's first industrial superpower. The economy, the empire, the entire Victorian way of life is built on coal, and coal requires miners, and miners require children like you to keep the air flowing through the tunnels. In 1842, 2 years from now in your timeline, a parliamentary commission will investigate conditions in the mines. They will hear testimony from children like you. They will read accounts of trappers sitting alone in the darkness for 12-hour shifts. They will learn of hurriers crawling through passages barely larger than their bodies, chains cutting into their waists. They will examine medical reports documenting the stunted growth, the curved spines, the respiratory diseases that afflict child miners. The testimonies are haunting in their simplicity. One boy, asked what he does in the darkness, replies that he sometimes sings to himself very quietly to keep from going mad. Another says she prays, counting prayers instead of sheep to mark the time. A third admits to crying, though never where anyone can hear, for crying is weakness, and weakness means you cannot do your job. The physical toll is devastating. Children who begin work in the mines at age 5 or 6 rarely reach normal adult height. The constant crouching, the poor nutrition, the heavy labor during critical growth years, all of this stunts the body's development. Spinal deformities are common. Legs become bowed from years of crouching and crawling. Respiratory diseases, miner's lung, pneumoconiosis, chronic bronchitis begin their work early. Many children do not survive to adulthood. Accidents claim some. Disease claims more. Tuberculosis spreads easily in the damp, dark conditions. Cholera and typhoid sweep through mining communities with devastating frequency. Even those who avoid dramatic causes of death often simply waste away, their bodies unable to sustain themselves on inadequate food and under the stress of constant labor. The Parliamentary Commission of 1842 will result in the Mines Act, prohibiting the employment of women and boys under 10 underground. But enforcement is lax, and economic pressure remains intense. Many families will continue to send children below ground, lying about their ages, because the alternative is destitution. But let us return to you, sitting in your darkness, counting the hours until your shift ends. Perhaps 6 hours have passed, perhaps 7. You think 7, based on the number of tubs that have passed, but you cannot be certain. Your body aches. Your legs have gone numb from sitting in the same position. Your throat is dry, your water long since finished. The cold has penetrated so deeply that you cannot remember what warmth feels like. You hear something different, not a coal tub, a different sound, a rhythmic tapping on stone. It's the signal, the end of shift. The overseer or one of his assistants is walking through the main tunnels, tapping a pick against the wall, the sound carrying through the mine. Your shift is ending. You try to stand, but your legs barely respond. Pins and needles shoot through your feet as blood flow returns. You steady yourself against the tunnel wall, breathing carefully, waiting for your legs to remember how to support your weight. Finally, you begin to crawl back toward the main roadway. The journey out is the reverse of your morning descent. You follow the tunnel back, passing other trappers emerging from their stations, all of you moving like shadows. The main roadway seems almost bright after the absolute darkness of your station. The cage arrives, you crowd on with the others, and the ascent begins. Rising through the shaft, you watch the stone walls slide past. Somewhere above, daylight exists, though you will not see it. Your shift has lasted from before dawn until after dusk, and the world above will be dark when you emerge. The cage jerks to a stop at the surface. You step off onto solid ground, into the cold night air. After 12 hours in the mine, even the winter darkness above ground seems almost pleasant. You can see stars, if the smoke from the colliery buildings permits. You can see the lights of cottages in the distance. The walk home is slow, exhausted. Your father will already be there. His shift ended hours ago, and he's been sleeping. Your mother will have saved you a portion of whatever dinner there was. Perhaps a thin stew, perhaps just bread and dripping. You will eat quickly, then collapse onto the straw pallet you share with your siblings. Tomorrow, or rather in a few hours, you will wake and do it all again. This is the rhythm of your life. 6 days per week, 12 hours per day, sitting alone in the darkness, opening and closing a door, 3 pence per day. This is childhood in the coal mines of Victorian England. Yet there are fragments of something else. On Sundays you do not work. If your family attends chapel, you might hear hymns, hear talk of a better world to come. On summer evenings, after the short Sunday shift some collieries require, you might play briefly with other children in the streets of the mining village. You might, for moments at a time, remember what it feels like to be a child. But these are brief respites in an existence dominated by darkness, cold, fear and exhaustion. And underlying everything is the knowledge, unspoken but universally understood, that your life will likely be short, your health will be ruined, your body will be broken by this work long before you reach middle age, if you reach middle age at all. This was the price of progress, the hidden cost of the Industrial Revolution, the reality that powered the great engines of Victorian prosperity. Children like you, sitting alone in the darkness, keeping the air moving through the mines, enabling the extraction of coal that fed furnaces and factories and made Britain wealthy. The trappers, the hurriers, the young girls who sorted coal at the surface, the boys who led the pit ponies through the tunnels, all of them were essential cogs in the machinery of coal production, and all of them paid with their health, their childhoods, sometimes their lives. Take a breath. You are not in that darkness now. You are safe, comfortable, warm. The world has moved on from such practices, though perhaps not everywhere, not entirely. History holds up a mirror, showing us not only how far we have come, but reminding us of the capacity for both cruelty and resilience in human nature. The trapper child's shift has ended for now. Let your mind drift from those dark tunnels, that cold and damp, that profound isolation. We will move to a different darkness soon, a different kind of cold, as we follow an expedition into the Arctic ice. Let us leave the confined darkness of the coal mines and travel to a different kind of darkness, a different kind of cold. We move from beneath the earth to the top of the world, from the cramped tunnels of Victorian England to the vast frozen expanses of the Arctic. It is May 1845. In the River Thames at Greenhithe, 2 ships prepare for departure. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, names that would later prove grimly prophetic, sit heavy in the water, laden with supplies for an expedition expected to last 3 years. They are bomb vessels, warships built to withstand the recoil of mortars, their hulls reinforced and strengthened. They have been further modified for Arctic service, their bows sheathed in iron to break through ice, their interiors fitted with heating systems powered by steam engines. Imagine standing on the dock that morning, watching the final preparations. The ships are marvels of Victorian engineering and confidence. Below decks, they carry an extraordinary array of supplies. 8,000 tins of preserved meat, vegetables, and soup. 1,000 pounds of tobacco, 200 gallons of spirits, fine china bearing the naval crest, a library of 200 books, hand organs that play 50 tunes each, mahogany desks for the officers' cabins, cut glass wine goblets, sterling silver flatware. The crew numbers 134 men, 129 officers and sailors, plus 5 men from the sick list who are expected to return with the transport ship that will accompany them part way. They are experienced, disciplined, well-fed. Many have served together on previous Arctic expeditions. They are volunteers all, drawn by the promise of adventure, by naval pay, by the glory of completing the Northwest Passage. that legendary route through the Arctic archipelago connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Leading them is Sir John Franklin, age 59, a naval officer of considerable reputation. He has led 2 previous Arctic expeditions overland. He is known as gentle, thoughtful, perhaps not the most dynamic of commanders, but experienced in Arctic conditions. His wife, Lady Jane Franklin, has championed his appointment to this command, despite his age, and despite some in the Admiralty considering him too old for such an arduous undertaking. The second in command is Captain Francis Crozier, an Irish naval officer commanding HMS Terror. Crozier is perhaps more capable than Franklin, certainly more skeptical of the expedition's prospects. He has expressed private doubts about the reliance on tinned provisions, about the late start in the season, about various aspects of the planning. But orders are orders, and duty is duty. The ships depart on May 19, 1845, to considerable fanfare. Crowds gather to watch them sail down the Thames. Newspapers print enthusiastic articles about the expedition's prospects. The Royal Navy's confidence is absolute. This will be the expedition that finally conquers the Northwest Passage, that adds this achievement to Britain's already considerable catalogue of exploration and dominion. The ships stop at Stromness in the Orkney Islands to take on additional supplies, then proceed to Greenland. At Disco Bay on the western coast of Greenland, they encounter 2 whaling vessels in late July. Letters are sent home, cheerful, optimistic letters. The officers report that morale is high, the ships are performing well, the men are healthy. 5 men from the sick list are transferred to a transport vessel for return to England. Then on July 26, 1845, the whaling ships part from Erebus and Terror, watching them sail north into Baffin Bay. They are never seen again by European eyes. Not Franklin, not Crozier, not any of the 129 men who continued north. They sail into the ice and into history, becoming perhaps the most famous lost expedition of the 19th century. What happens next must be reconstructed from fragments, from Inuit testimony, from written records found years later, from physical evidence recovered decades and even centuries after the fact, from modern forensic archaeology. It is a story told in pieces, in scattered remains, in gaps and silences as vast as the Arctic itself. The expedition likely proceeds according to plan initially. They enter Lancaster Sound, the gateway to the Arctic archipelago. They explore, make observations, chart coastlines. The summer sailing season in the Arctic is brief, only a few weeks when the ice breaks up enough to permit navigation. They would have known from the start that they would need to overwinter to find a safe harbor where the ships could be frozen in, where the crew would wait out the long Arctic night before resuming their exploration the following summer. The first winter, 1845-46, is probably spent at Beechey Island, a small island off the southern coast of Devon Island. Evidence discovered decades later confirms this. The remains of a camp, a storehouse, a workshop, and 3 graves. John Torrington, John Hartnell, and William Brain, 3 young men who died during that first winter. Their bodies, preserved in the permafrost, would tell modern scientists much about the expedition's circumstances when they were exhumed in the 1980s. But for now, in 1846, their deaths are recorded, their bodies buried in the frozen ground, and the expedition prepares to continue. Imagine that first winter. The ships frozen solid in the ice, tilted slightly, groaning as the ice shifts and presses against their hulls. The sun disappearing below the horizon in late October, not to return until late February. The temperature dropping to 40, 50, even 60 degrees below zero. The darkness is not absolute. The moon provides some light. The aurora borealis sometimes dances across the sky in shimmering curtains of green and purple. But the isolation is profound. Below decks, the men follow a strict routine. The heating systems keep the temperature above freezing, though barely. Condensation forms on the walls, freezing into sheets of ice that must be scraped away. The men organize classes, the officers teach reading and writing to the sailors, navigation, mathematics. The library provides entertainment. The hand organs play their 50 tunes over and over until the melodies become almost maddening in their repetition. Theatre performances are organized, with men playing all the roles in elaborate productions. Food is regular if monotonous. The tinned provisions are supplemented with fresh meat when hunting is possible. Arctic foxes, seabirds, the occasional seal or caribou. But the tins are the foundation of the diet. Tins of meat, tins of vegetables, tins of soup. Thousands upon thousands of tins, each sealed with lead solder, each potentially leaching poison into the food it contains. The tinned food was provided by Stefan Goldner, who had won the contract by underbidding his competitors. Investigation would later reveal that Goldner had rushed production to meet his deadlines, using excessive amounts of lead solder to seal the tins quickly. Some tins were so poorly prepared that the food inside had already begun to spoil before the ships left England. But in the winter of 1845-46, the men do not know this. They eat their rations and follow their routines and wait for the sun to return. When summer comes in 1846, the ice breaks up and the ships resume their southward journey. They navigate through Peel Sound, committing to a route that will take them west of King William Island. This decision, reasonable given their charts and the ice conditions they observe, will prove fateful. Had they chosen the eastern route around King William Island, they might have found clearer passage. But the charts are incomplete, and the ice conditions vary from year to year, and they make the choice that seems best with the information available. They make progress. They chart new coastline, they record observations, and then in September 1846, northwest of King William Island, the ice closes in and does not release them. The ships are trapped. The second winter begins. Another 9 months of darkness, cold, waiting. But this winter is different. This winter they are not near shore. This winter, hunting is nearly impossible. This winter they must rely entirely on their stored provisions, on the tins that form neat rows in the holds of both ships. Scurvy begins to appear. Scurvy, that ancient curse of sailors caused by vitamin C deficiency. The symptoms are insidious. Fatigue, weakness, spots on the skin, soft and bleeding gums, old wounds reopening. As it progresses, teeth loosen and fall out, joints become painful, breathing becomes difficult. Without fresh food containing vitamin C, scurvy is inexorable and deadly. The lemon juice that the Royal Navy provides as an anti-scurvy measure has lost much of its potency during storage. The tinned vegetables provide little nutrition. The canning process destroys most of the vitamin C. The men are slowly starving of nutrients even as their stomachs are full. And the lead poisoning progresses. Lead accumulates in the body. It causes neurological symptoms, confusion, irritability, difficulty concentrating. It causes physical symptoms, abdominal pain, constipation, weakness. It impairs judgment and decision-making. The expedition's officers, who eat from the tinned provisions more than the common sailors who sometimes supplement with ship's biscuit and dried meat, may be particularly affected. Summer 1847 comes, but the ice does not break. The ships remain frozen. The summer is unusually cold, the ice unusually thick. They cannot move. The realization must settle over the crew like the darkness of winter. They are trapped for another year. The third winter begins. The coal for the heating systems is running low. The men are weaker now, many suffering from scurvy, from lead poisoning, from tuberculosis that spreads easily in the closed environment of the ships. Morale, which has been maintained through discipline and routine, begins to crack. On June 11, 1847, Sir John Franklin dies. The cause is not recorded, but the possibilities are many: heart attack, stroke, complications from lead poisoning, pneumonia, any of the diseases that afflict the crew. He is 61 years old. His body is likely committed to the ice, buried in the frozen sea, command passes to Captain Crozier. He is now responsible for 104 men. 25 have died by this point from various causes. The ships are still trapped. The food supplies, while still substantial, are diminishing. The health of the crew is deteriorating rapidly. The summer of 1848 brings no relief. The ice remains solid. A decision must be made. They cannot remain with the ships indefinitely. Supplies will eventually run out. The ships may never be freed from the ice. They must attempt to reach safety overland. A written record is left, deposited in a cairn on King William Island. The note is on a standard Admiralty form with 2 messages written on it. The first, dated May 28, 1847, is optimistic, noting that the expedition has wintered at Beechey Island and is proceeding according to plan. The second message, written around the margins of the form in April 1848, tells a different story. It notes Franklin's death, the ship's abandonment, the intention to march south toward the Back River and attempt to reach a Hudson's Bay Company outpost hundreds of miles away. Imagine the preparation for abandonment. The ships that have been home for 3 years must be left behind. The men must choose what to take: food, equipment, weapons, supplies. They construct sledges and boats that can be dragged across the ice. They load these sledges with provisions, with navigational equipment, with items that in retrospect seem absurd: sterling silver flatware, books, brass curtain rods, button polish. In April 1848, 105 men begin their march south. They are already weak, already sick, already dying. They are attempting to cover hundreds of miles across some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth, hauling heavy sledges in conditions that would challenge healthy men. The Inuit, the indigenous people of the Arctic, observed the expedition's final march. Their testimony, collected years later by search expeditions, provides fragments of the story. They describe men pulling boats on sledges across the ice. They describe encounters with small groups of white men, some appearing sick or mad, speaking words the Inuit cannot understand. They describe finding bodies on the ice, in tents, scattered across King William Island. The march south is doomed from the start. The men are too weak, the distance too great, the conditions too harsh. They begin to die, individually at first, then in larger groups. Some succumb to scurvy, their bodies simply giving out. Some die from exposure, from starvation, from lead poisoning that has impaired their ability to think clearly and make rational decisions. The physical evidence, discovered over many decades, tells the rest of the story in fragments. Bodies are found scattered along the western and southern coasts of King William Island. A boat mounted on a sledge is discovered, containing 2 skeletons and a bizarre collection of items: chocolate, tea, tobacco, towels, soap, sponges, slippers, combs, and 26 pieces of silver plate. The boat was being dragged back toward the ships, suggesting that some men, perhaps delirious, perhaps desperate, attempted to return. More remains are found at various locations: Terror Bay, Erebus Bay, along the route toward the Back River. The bones show evidence of the expedition's final desperation. Cut marks indicate that the dead were butchered, their flesh removed, their bones broken to extract the marrow. The evidence points to cannibalism, to men so desperate that they consumed their dead companions in a vain attempt to survive. This is handled carefully by Victorian society when the evidence comes to light. The idea of British naval officers and sailors resorting to cannibalism is almost unthinkable, a challenge to the civilized self-image of the empire. But the evidence is undeniable. Starvation drives humans to extremes. The men of the Franklin expedition, in their final weeks and days, crossed every boundary in their struggle to survive. None succeed. All 129 men who sailed north in 1845 die in the Arctic. Some die on the ships, their bodies never recovered. Some died during the march south. A few may have survived into 1850 or even later, but if so, they left no record, and their remains were absorbed into the Arctic landscape. Back in England, concern grows when the expedition does not return in 1848. The Admiralty Initially unconcerned, Arctic expeditions often take longer than expected, finally organizes search expeditions. Multiple missions are launched over the following decade. Some search by ship, others by overland routes. They find the winter camp at Beachy Island, the 3 graves, some scattered equipment. They find the written record at Victory Point. They find scattered remains and relics. Lady Jane Franklin, refusing to accept her husband's death without proof, personally finances search expeditions. She becomes a public figure, advocating for continued search efforts even as the Admiralty's interest wanes. She will outlive her husband by 30 years, never ceasing in her efforts to discover his fate and ensure his legacy. The full story emerges slowly. Inuit testimony is initially discounted. Victorian racial prejudices lead many to dismiss indigenous accounts as unreliable. But as physical evidence accumulates, the Inuit accounts are confirmed. They were truthful witnesses to the expedition's final chapter. In the late 20th century, modern forensic science adds new details. The 3 bodies exhumed from Beachy Island are remarkably preserved by the permafrost. Autopsies reveal elevated lead levels in their tissues, confirming the lead poisoning hypothesis. Their faces, frozen for nearly 150 years, are photographed. Young men in their 20s, their expressions peaceful, their bodies bearing the evidence of tuberculosis and lead exposure. In 2014 and 2016, Canadian search expeditions using modern sonar and underwater robots discover the wrecks of both Erebus and Terror. Erebus is found off the southern coast of King William Island, sitting upright on the seafloor in remarkably good condition. Terror is found in Terror Bay, also well preserved. Artifacts recovered from the wrecks add more details. Dishes still in place in officers' cabins, bottles in storage, equipment intact. The ships themselves tell a final story. Both appear to have been maintained and organized when finally abandoned, suggesting that discipline was maintained until nearly the end. There is evidence that men returned to the ships after the initial abandonment, perhaps to retrieve additional supplies, perhaps seeking shelter. But ultimately, the ships were left to sink slowly through the ice into the cold Arctic waters. The Franklin expedition becomes a Victorian obsession. Dozens of search missions are launched, songs and poems are written, memorials are erected. Franklin is lionized as a hero who gave his life in the pursuit of exploration. The suffering of his men, their desperate final march, their deaths in the ice. All of this is transformed into narrative of noble sacrifice for the advancement of knowledge. But set aside the Victorian romanticism for a moment. Consider the reality. 129 men entered the Arctic, none emerged. They died slowly over years from a combination of scurvy, lead poisoning, starvation, exposure, and disease. They experienced fear, suffering, the gradual realization that rescue would not come, the slow dissolution of civilization and order as their situation became increasingly desperate. The ice that trapped them was indifferent to their sophisticated equipment, their Royal Navy discipline, their confidence in British superiority and technological progress. The Arctic cared nothing for their charts and chronometers and steam engines. It simply was, as it had been for millennia, vast and cold and lethal to those unprepared for its realities. And yet, there is something in the story that speaks to human resilience, to the capacity to maintain order and civilization even in impossible circumstances. The men maintained naval discipline for years. They followed routines, conducted themselves as sailors, obeyed orders. Even in their final march, they attempted to do things properly, to follow protocols, to behave as British naval personnel should behave. The Arctic night is long, but it always ends. The ice that seems permanent always eventually breaks. But for Franklin's men, these truths came too late or not at all. They remain there still, scattered across King William Island, entombed in the Arctic ice, their bones marking the high water mark of Victorian confidence in the face of nature's indifference. Let the cold of the Arctic fade from your thoughts. Let the image of ships trapped in ice dissolve. we turn now from the frozen north to Victorian England's peculiar relationship with death itself, to the elaborate rituals and customs that grew up around mortality in this era of empire and industry. Segment 3, Victorian death culture and mourning rituals, 25 to 30 minutes. We return now to Victorian England, to drawing rooms and parlours, to cemeteries and photography studios, to a world where death was not hidden away, but rather embraced, ritualized, and woven into the fabric of daily life. The Victorians had a relationship with death that seems almost incomprehensible to modern sensibilities. Elaborate, formalized, obsessive in its attention to detail and propriety. Death was everywhere in Victorian England. Infant mortality was staggeringly high. In the 1840s, nearly half of all children died before their 5th birthday. Tuberculosis, typhoid, cholera, scarlet fever, and countless other diseases swept through cities and countryside alike. Childbirth claimed the lives of many women. Industrial accidents killed workers daily. The average life expectancy was 40 years, and this was brought down by the high rate of childhood deaths. But even those who survived childhood faced constant threats to their health and safety. In a world where death was so prevalent, so immediate a presence in every household, Victorian society developed an intricate system of customs, rituals, and material culture around mourning and remembrance. These were not merely superstitions or quaint customs, but rather a complex social and emotional framework for processing grief, maintaining social order, and keeping the memory of the dead present among the living. Let us begin with mourning dress, for this was perhaps the most visible and strictly codified aspect of Victorian death culture. When a family member died, particularly when a woman's husband died, an elaborate sequence of mourning periods began, each with its specific requirements for clothing, behavior, and social interaction. For a widow, the deepest mourning period lasted 1 year and 1 day. During this time, she would wear only black, not merely black clothing, but black of a specific type. The fabric was to be completely non-reflective, usually a dull matte cloth called bombazine or crepe. Crepe had a distinctive crinkled texture created through a special weaving process, and it caught the light not at all, absorbing it completely, creating a visual effect of profound darkness. Imagine the weight of such clothing. The fabrics were heavy, the dresses voluminous even by Victorian standards. Multiple layers, the chemise, the corset, the petticoats, the dress itself, often trimmed with deep bands of crepe at the hem and sleeves. In summer, this clothing was stifling. Crepe in particular was uncomfortable, scratchy against the skin, and it deteriorated quickly, turning rusty brown with exposure to air and moisture, requiring frequent replacement. During this deepest mourning period, the widow would wear a widow's cap, a close-fitting white cap with a long black veil of crepe that could extend to the ground. She would wear jet jewelry carved from a hard black stone, lightweight and deeply black. She would not attend social gatherings, would not participate in entertainment, would live a life of deliberate withdrawal from normal social activities. After the first year, she would enter second mourning, which lasted 9 months. The crepe could be reduced somewhat, though black remained the required color. Small amounts of white trim might be permitted. The widow's cap could be shorter. Social restrictions relaxed slightly. She might attend church, might receive visitors at home, though still no public entertainment. Then came ordinary mourning for 3 months, where silk fabrics might replace crepe, though still in black. Finally, half mourning for 6 months, where colors like grey, mauve and purple were permitted. Only after this entire period, 2 years and 3 months, could a widow fully return to wearing colors and participating normally in society. For men, the requirements were less onerous, but still significant. A widower would wear a black suit, a black armband, black gloves, and a black hatband for a year, though his social activities were less restricted. For parents mourning a child, or children mourning parents, or siblings mourning each other, There were different prescribed periods and requirements, all carefully delineated in etiquette books that prescribed behavior for every social situation. These rules were not merely suggestions. In middle-class and upper-class Victorian society, failure to observe proper mourning could result in social ostracism, in being labelled as unfeeling or improper. The mourning clothing industry became substantial. Specialized shops sold mourning wear, and large department stores had entire mourning departments where one could purchase everything needed for a proper mourning wardrobe. But mourning dress was only the beginning. The Victorians developed an entire material culture around death and remembrance, creating objects that seem strange, even macabre, to modern eyes. Mourning jewelry was particularly popular. Lockets containing photographs of the deceased were common, but more elaborate pieces incorporated the actual hair of the dead person. Hair jewelry had been popular since the Georgian period, but Victorians elevated it to an art form. Imagine a brooch, intricately designed, featuring a woven pattern created entirely from human hair. The hair would be cleaned, sorted by color, and then woven by skilled artisans into complex patterns. Flowers, geometric designs, landscapes, even portraits. These might be set under glass in a gold or jet frame, often with an inscription, "In memory of Sarah, died March 12, 1852, aged 23 years. Hair was chosen for this purpose because it does not decay. Long after the body has returned to dust, hair remains unchanged, a tangible connection to the physical presence of the deceased. A lock of hair in a locket, worn close to the heart, kept the dead person literally close to the living. Some pieces were extraordinarily elaborate, bracelets woven entirely from hair, watch chains, rings with tiny compartments containing coiled locks of hair. The creation of these pieces was often a family activity. Mothers and daughters would sit together, working the hair of a deceased family member into a bracelet or brooch, their hands busy with the detailed work, their conversation turning to memories of the departed. The labor of creating the piece became itself a form of mourning ritual, a way of processing grief through focused, repetitive action. Another practice that seems unsettling to modern sensibilities was post-mortem photography. In an era when photography was expensive and relatively rare, many families had never had their portrait taken together. When a family member died, particularly a child, it became common to have a photograph taken of the deceased, often arranged as though they were merely sleeping. Picture a Victorian photography studio, or more often, a photographer arriving at the family home with his equipment. The body would be arranged carefully, propped in a chair, laid on a sofa, sometimes held by family members, particularly in the case of infants. The goal was to create one lasting image, one photograph that would preserve the appearance of the loved one. Some of these photographs are quite peaceful. A child in a white dress, lying on a bed, surrounded by flowers, looking for all the world as though simply asleep. Others are more unsettling to modern eyes. Adults propped in chairs with their eyes painted open on the photograph, or held by family members in poses that attempted to simulate life. But understanding the context is essential. For many families, this photograph would be the only image they would ever have of their child or spouse or parent. Photography was capturing something that would otherwise be lost forever. The face, the form, the physical presence of someone deeply loved. The photographs were treasured, displayed in the home, kept in albums alongside pictures of the living. Some photographers specialized in post-mortem work, developing techniques to make the images as lifelike as possible. They would use special stands and supports hidden behind the body to hold it upright. They would arrange flowers and fabrics to create pleasing compositions. They understood that these photographs served both as memorials and as tools for grief, something tangible to look at, to remember, to show to others. The Victorian fascination with death extended beyond personal mourning into broader cultural phenomena. Cemeteries became elaborate parks, designed as places not just for burial, but for visitation, contemplation, and even recreation. The great Victorian cemeteries, Highgate in London, Kensal Green, Abney Park, were carefully planned landscapes combining natural beauty with architectural grandeur. They were designed by landscape architects, laid out with winding paths, planted with mature trees, decorated with elaborate monuments and mausoleums. Walking through a Victorian cemetery, you would encounter Gothic chapels, Egyptian-style tombs, neoclassical temples, Celtic crosses, angels with outstretched wings, weeping women carved in marble, urns draped in stone cloth that seemed to flow like actual fabric despite being carved from solid rock. These monuments reflected both the wealth of the deceased and the aesthetic sensibilities of the era, a mixing of styles, a celebration of various historical periods and cultures, all united in the service of commemorating the dead. Families would visit these cemeteries regularly, bringing flowers to graves, sitting on benches to read or sketch, taking walks along the paths. The cemeteries were seen as educational. Children would be brought to see the monuments, to read the inscriptions, to contemplate mortality and morality. Sunday cemetery visits were common, a family outing that combined fresh air, contemplation, and remembrance of loved ones. The monuments themselves often told stories. Inscriptions detailed not just names and dates, but character, achievements, the circumstances of death. Children's graves might feature carved lambs or broken columns, symbolizing lives cut short. A wife's grave might be marked with intertwined wedding rings. Sailors might have anchors, soldiers would have military symbols, and various professions would be represented in carved stone. The stonemason's tools, the doctor's caduceus, the farmer's plough. The funeral industry became increasingly elaborate and professionalized during the Victorian era. The undertaker, a profession that had previously been part-time work combined with furniture making or livery stable operation, became a specialized trade with its own standards and practices. A proper Victorian funeral required careful choreography. When someone died, the undertaker would arrive to take charge. The body would be washed and prepared, dressed in a burial shroud or their best clothes. For those who could afford it, embalming became more common, allowing for longer viewing periods and more elaborate funerals. The body would be laid out in the home, typically in the front parlor, which would be draped in black cloth. Mirrors would be covered or turned to the wall. Various superstitions surrounded the reflection of a corpse. Clocks might be stopped at the time of death. The windows might be kept partially open to allow the soul to depart. For several days, the body would remain in the home, allowing friends and family to pay their respects. Mourners would sit with the body, the tradition of the wake, ensuring the deceased was not left alone, a custom mixing practicality. Someone needed to tend to visitors with superstition and respect. The funeral itself would be a carefully orchestrated event. The coffin, which might be quite elaborate depending on the family's means, polished wood with brass fittings, velvet lining, perhaps a viewing window of glass over the deceased's face, would be loaded onto a hearse. Victorian hearses were impressive conveyances, horse-drawn carriages specifically designed for carrying coffins, often black with elaborate carved decorations, pulled by black horses wearing black plumes. The procession would move slowly through the streets to the cemetery or church. Depending on the status of the deceased, the procession might be quite long. Family members in hired carriages, friends walking behind, professional mourners hired to add to the display of grief. In an era before pension systems and widespread insurance, these elaborate funerals represented a significant expenditure, but they were considered essential for maintaining social respectability. For the poor, who could not afford such displays, there was constant anxiety about proper burial. The workhouse funeral, with its plain coffin and unmarked grave, represented a profound indignity, a final confirmation of failure to maintain one's place in society. Burial clubs and friendly societies existed specifically to ensure that working-class families could afford a respectable funeral, members paying small, regular contributions that would provide funeral expenses when needed. Running parallel to these material practices was a surge of interest in spiritualism, the belief that the dead could communicate with the living through mediums and séances. This movement began in America in the late 1840s, but quickly spread to Britain, where it found particularly fertile ground among Victorians grappling with grief and seeking comfort in the possibility of continued connection with deceased loved ones. Séances became fashionable in Victorian drawing rooms. A medium, often a woman, as women were considered more naturally sensitive to spiritual forces, would gather participants around a table. The lights would be dimmed or extinguished entirely. The participants would place their hands on the table, often forming a chain by holding hands with their neighbors. Then would come the manifestations. The table might move, tilting or rotating or seeming to float. Rappings would be heard, knocks and taps that could be interpreted as messages from spirits. Some mediums would enter trances, speaking in voices supposedly belonging to the dead, delivering messages to the living. Spirit writing would appear, messages supposedly written by deceased persons through the hand of the medium. More elaborate phenomena might occur. Ectoplasm, a mysterious substance supposedly produced from the medium's body and representing spiritual energy, would appear often as gauzy, cloth-like material emerging from the medium's mouth or nose. Spirit photography would capture ghostly images of deceased persons appearing beside the living. Musical instruments placed in the room would play themselves. Objects would move without visible cause. Much of this was fraud, accomplished through clever stagecraft, confederates, and the willingness of grieving participants to believe. Skeptics and investigators regularly exposed mediums using hidden mechanisms, accomplices, and various tricks. Yet spiritualism continued to attract followers, including some of the most educated and rational minds of the era. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of the supremely rational Sherlock Holmes, was a devoted spiritualist, convinced of the reality of communication with the dead. Prominent scientists attended séances and wrote papers attempting to bring scientific methodology to the investigation of psychic phenomena. The Society for Psychical Research, founded in 1882, attracted respectable scholars who seriously investigated claims of supernatural experiences. Understanding this requires appreciating the Victorian context. This was an era of tremendous scientific advancement. Evolution, thermodynamics, electromagnetic theory, the germ theory of disease. Yet it was also an era when traditional religious certainties were being challenged. Darwin's work raised troubling questions about biblical accounts. Scientific materialism seemed to leave no room for the soul or afterlife. Spiritualism offered a middle path. It claimed to be scientific, to provide empirical evidence for the survival of consciousness after death, to prove through observation and experiment that the dead continued to exist in some form. For many Victorians, this was deeply appealing, offering comfort without requiring blind faith. The séance also served social functions beyond its supposed supernatural purposes. It was an acceptable way for men and women to sit together in darkness, hands touching, experiencing intense emotions in a context that was considered respectable. It was entertainment, a thrill, a break from the rigid formality of Victorian social life. It was a space where women, as mediums, could exercise authority and command attention in ways otherwise unavailable to them. But beneath the potential for fraud and the social aspects, there was genuine grief. The Victorians mourned deeply and openly. The elaborate rituals, the mourning dress, the jewelry, the photographs, the séances, all of these were attempts to process enormous loss, to maintain connection with the dead, to make sense of mortality in an era when death was constant and often sudden. Queen Victoria herself exemplified this mourning culture. When her beloved husband, Prince Albert, died in 1861, she entered mourning and never truly emerged. For the remaining 40 years of her life, she wore black, kept Albert's rooms exactly as they had been at his death, had his clothing laid out daily as though he might return. Her prolonged mourning was both admired as devoted love and criticized as excessive, but it set a tone for the entire nation. The elaborate Victorian death culture was not without critics even in its own time. Some observers noted that the rules of mourning fell particularly heavily on women, who were expected to withdraw from society for years, while men could continue their business and social lives with only minor modifications to their dress. The expense of proper mourning could be crippling for families of modest means, forcing them into debt to maintain appearances. Reformers gradually pushed for simpler, less restrictive mourning customs. By the end of the Victorian era and into the Edwardian period, the most extreme practices were beginning to fade. Mourning periods were shortened, the rules relaxed, post-mortem photography declined as regular photography became more affordable and common, meaning families had pictures of their loved ones taken while alive. Yet something was perhaps lost in this modernization. The Victorian approach to death, while morbid by our standards, was also more honest than what would follow. Death was acknowledged, grief was given space and time, the dead were not immediately forgotten but rather kept present through ritual and remembrance. In our modern world, death often happens in hospitals, hidden from daily life. Bodies are quickly removed to funeral homes. Services are brief. Grief is expected to be processed privately and quickly. We no longer wear mourning dress, no longer keep locks of hair, no longer sit with our dead in the parlor. We have gained in some ways: less social restriction, less anxiety about proper form, less dwelling on mortality. But we have also lost something: permission to grieve openly, time to process loss, rituals that help us transition from one state to another. The Victorian relationship with death was complex, contradictory, sometimes beautiful, sometimes troubling. It reflected an era struggling with tremendous change: industrialization, urbanization, scientific advancement, religious doubt. The elaborate mourning customs were a way of imposing order on chaos, of maintaining social stability in the face of constant mortality, of keeping the dead present among the living, even as the world rushed forward into modernity. Let these images fade now: the crepe dresses, the hair jewelry, the séance tables, the cemetery monuments. We move from darkness toward light, from death toward life. From the elaborate mourning of all classes to the comfortable domesticity of the Victorian middle class. We emerge now into sunlight, into the warm glow of gaslight behind lace curtains, into a world of order, comfort, and respectability. This is the Victorian middle class, that expanding layer of society that defined so much of the era's character, neither aristocratic nor working class, but something in between, something new, something that would come to dominate British society and culture. Imagine yourself in a substantial townhouse in a respectable London suburb, perhaps Kensington or Clapham, in the year 1880. The house is part of a terrace, 3 stories above ground plus a basement, built in the style that has become ubiquitous: red brick facade, sash windows, a small front garden separated from the street by iron railings, a front door with a polished brass knocker and letterbox. This is the home of a prosperous family. Perhaps the father is a lawyer, or a successful merchant, or a civil servant of some standing. The household income is perhaps £300 per year, sufficient for comfort, for servants, for maintaining the standards expected of respectable middle-class life. The day begins early. Though not as early as the coal miner's child or the domestic servants, the first to wake in the household proper are not the family members, but the servants. 3 of them in this household, a modest staff by the standards of the wealthy, but essential for maintaining middle-class life. The maid of all work, a young woman named Sarah, rises at 5:30. Her room is in the attic, a small space with a narrow bed, a washstand, a chest for her few possessions. She dresses quickly in her work uniform, a plain cotton dress, a white apron, a cap to cover her hair. She descends the narrow back stairs to the basement where the kitchen occupies the space beneath the main house. Her first task is lighting the range, that massive iron stove that dominates the kitchen. She clears out yesterday's ashes, lays new kindling and coal, coaxes the fire to life. The range must be hot before breakfast can be prepared, and it will remain lit all day, heating the house through a system of pipes and radiators, providing hot water, cooking all meals. While the range heats, she fills coal scuttles to take upstairs to the main rooms, where fireplaces will be lit to supplement the central heating. She sweeps the front steps, polishes the brass on the front door, draws back curtains in the main rooms, empties chamber pots from the bedrooms, carries hot water in pitchers upstairs for washing. The cook arrives. She does not live in, but comes daily from her own residence nearby. Together, she and Sarah prepare breakfast. For a middle-class household, breakfast is substantial: porridge, eggs, bacon, toast, marmalade, tea. The food is cooked in the basement kitchen and carried up the back stairs to the dining room, where it will be served from a sideboard, keeping the dishes warm on spirit burners. At 7:30, the master of the house descends to breakfast. He is 45 years old, dressed in dark trousers, waistcoat, white shirt with stiff collar and jacket. His appearance is meticulous: hair pomaded and combed, beard neatly trimmed, shoes polished to a high shine. He takes his place at the head of the dining table and begins his breakfast, reading the Times as he eats. The children come down next, 3 of them, ages 8, 10 and 12. They are dressed in their day clothes, already neat and proper. The girls wear dresses with white pinafores over them to protect the fabric. The boy wears short trousers. He will graduate to long trousers at 14, a significant milestone of approaching manhood. They eat quietly, speaking only when spoken to, their father occasionally commenting on something from the newspaper or asking about their lessons. The mistress of the house, Mrs. Henderson, arrives last. She is 40 years old, dressed in a day dress of dark blue wool. Her hair arranged in an elaborate style that took her lady's maid 20 minutes to create. Parted in the center, drawn back smoothly over her ears, pinned in a complex knot at the back. She wears a cameo brooch at her throat, a watch pinned to her bodice, jet earrings. Even for breakfast in her own home, she is fully and formally dressed. She does not eat much: a piece of toast, a cup of tea. Fashion dictates a tiny waist, achieved through tight corseting, and this leaves little room for large meals. She reviews the day's plans with her husband, who will shortly depart for his office in the city. She discusses household matters, perhaps mentions social calls she plans to make or guests they are expecting. At 8:30, Mr. Henderson departs for his office. He takes his hat, coat, walking stick and briefcase from the stand in the hall, descends the front steps and walks to the omnibus stop, where he will ride into the city for his day's work. He will return at 6 in the evening, home for dinner at 7. The children leave shortly after for school. The girls attend a small day school for young ladies nearby, where they learn reading, writing, arithmetic, French, drawing, music and needlework. The boy attends a grammar school, where his education is more rigorous, preparing him potentially for university, for the professions, for the masculine world of business and public life. And now the house belongs to Mrs. Henderson, to the domain she rules with quiet efficiency. Her role as mistress of the household is not idle, despite the presence of servants. She must manage the household accounts, plan meals, oversee the servants' work, maintain the social connections that define the family's place in society, and ensure that the home runs smoothly and reflects well on her husband's position. She begins with her morning meeting with Cook, held in the morning room, a smaller, less formal sitting room used for such purposes. Together they plan the day's meals: what will be served for lunch, what for dinner, What provisions need to be purchased? Cook presents the accounts for yesterday's expenses, which Mrs. Henderson reviews carefully. She prides herself on her household management, on getting good value while maintaining proper standards. The menus must be varied, interesting, appropriate to the season and to the family's status, yet also economical. For today's dinner, she approves Cook's suggestion of soup to start, then roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, roasted potatoes and Brussels sprouts, followed by apple tart with custard, then a savoury of Welsh rarebit, finally cheese and biscuits. This is a relatively simple dinner for the family alone. When entertaining guests, the meal would be far more elaborate, extending to 7 or 8 courses. After meeting with Cook, Mrs. Henderson inspects the house. She walks through each room, checking that everything is in order, that the maid has dusted properly, that the fires are drawing well, that the windows are clean, that the brasses are polished. She is not unkind, but she has standards, and the servants know that slipshod work will be noticed and corrected. The morning room where she settles to her own tasks is comfortable, feminine in its decoration. The walls are papered in a William Morris design, stylized flowers and foliage in muted greens and golds. Framed watercolors, some painted by Mrs. Henderson herself, hang on the walls. The furniture is substantial but comfortable. A writing desk where she will handle her correspondence, a comfortable chair by the fire where she can read or do needlework, a small sofa where she might receive a close friend informally. She spends the late morning on correspondence. Letter writing is an essential skill and a significant task for a Victorian lady. She writes to her sister in Bath, a long, newsy letter discussing family matters, local events, the children's progress. She writes a formal note accepting an invitation to tea next week. She writes to a charity organization of which she is a member, confirming her attendance at the next meeting. Each letter is carefully composed, written in elegant script on good writing paper, properly folded and sealed. The letters will be posted by the maid during her afternoon errands. The Victorian postal system is remarkably efficient. Letters posted in London in the morning will be delivered that same afternoon, sometimes within hours. This rapid communication helps maintain the complex web of social connections on which middle-class life depends. At 1 o'clock, lunch is served. This is a lighter meal than breakfast or dinner, perhaps cold meat, bread and butter, cheese, cake, tea. Mrs. Henderson eats alone, as her husband is at work and the children at school. She might read while eating or simply sit quietly, resting before the afternoon's activities. The afternoon is devoted to social calls, one of the most important activities in a Victorian lady's life. She goes upstairs to change. The morning dress is appropriate for receiving tradesmen and managing the household, but social calls require something more formal. Her lady's maid helps her into an afternoon dress of plum-colored silk with elaborately draped overskirt and bustle creating the fashionable silhouette. A visiting dress must be just so, elegant but not ostentatious, fashionable but not excessively so, appropriate to one's station in life. She adds gloves, a hat secured with hat pins, a card case containing her calling cards. These cards are small rectangles of thick paper engraved with Mrs. Charles Henderson, used to announce one's presence when calling on others or left as a record of having called if the person was not at home. She takes the carriage. The family maintains a small brougham, a one-horse carriage, and employs a man who serves as both coachman and general manservant. The carriage is another marker of status, evidence that the family has progressed beyond omnibuses and hired cabs. The afternoon calls follow strict protocols. Each call lasts 15 to 20 minutes. Longer would be presumptuous, shorter would be insulting. The conversation covers appropriate topics: family health, mutual acquaintances, social events, perhaps charitable work or cultural matters. Politics and religion are generally avoided, as are personal problems or anything unpleasant. Business is never discussed. That is the masculine realm. She calls on Mrs. Bartlett, whose husband is a physician. They sit in Mrs. Bartlett's drawing room, which is decorated with similar gentility, heavy curtains shutting out the outside world, antimacassars protecting the upholstery from gentlemen's hair oil, numerous small ornaments displayed on every surface, porcelain figurines, framed photographs, souvenirs from trips to the seaside. The tea is served by Mrs. Bartlett's maid. Tea in fine china cups, small sandwiches with the crusts cut off, delicate cakes. The two women discuss the upcoming church bazaar, at which Mrs. Henderson has agreed to manage the needlework stall. They speak of their children's progress, of a concert one attended recently, of a new dressmaker who has opened a shop nearby. Throughout the conversation, both women are acutely aware of social nuances, of the careful dance of status and respectability. They are not intimate friends, not really, but rather social peers maintaining the connections that define their position in society. Genuine friendship can exist within these constraints, but it must always be filtered through the elaborate rules of propriety. Mrs. Henderson makes 2 more calls that afternoon, then returns home by 4:30. She has tea again. Tea is drunk multiple times per day in a Victorian household, and then settles to needlework or reading until the children return from school. The children arrive at 5, somewhat disheveled from their day. They are sent to wash and tidy themselves, then join their mother in the morning room for an hour before dinner. This is family time. The children might practice their music lessons or read aloud or work on their studies. Mrs. Henderson supervises, corrects, encourages. She is preparing her daughters to be accomplished young ladies, her son to be a gentleman. At 6, Mr. Henderson returns from his office. He changes from his business clothes into dinner attire, the same dark suit but with a fresh collar, his formal evening wear. The family gathers in the drawing room at 7 for dinner. The drawing room is the finest room in the house, reserved for formal entertaining and family occasions. It occupies the front of the first floor, above the ground floor dining room. The windows overlook the street, though heavy velvet curtains can be drawn for privacy. The furniture is substantial, expensive, carefully arranged, a horsehair sofa, several upholstered chairs, occasional tables bearing lamps and ornaments, a piano in one corner, bookcases along one wall. The room is crowded with objects, as Victorian taste favors abundance. Every surface holds something, every wall has pictures or mirrors, the mantelpiece displays ornaments arranged with careful symmetry. There are family photographs in silver frames, souvenir china from seaside holidays, a stuffed bird under a glass dome, wax flowers under another dome, a collection of seashells, numerous books in matching leather bindings. Dinner is announced, and the family proceeds to the dining room in proper order, Mr. Henderson leading, then Mrs. Henderson, then the children. They take their places at the mahogany table, which can seat 12, but tonight accommodates just the 5 of them. The meal progresses through its courses, each served by the maid, who brings the dishes up from the basement kitchen, serves each person, then removes the plates before the next course. The conversation at dinner is controlled, pleasant, focusing on the day's events, discussed in proper fashion. Mr. Henderson speaks of something amusing that occurred at his office. Mrs. Henderson mentions her afternoon calls. The children are mostly silent, speaking when addressed, learning by observation how adults conduct themselves. The dinner lasts an hour. When finished, Mrs. Henderson and the children withdraw to the drawing room, leaving Mr. Henderson to his port wine and cigar at the table, a masculine ritual, time for contemplation or for conversation with other men if there were guests. After 15 minutes, he joins the family in the drawing room. The evening is devoted to genteel entertainment. One of the daughters plays the piano. She's been learning for 4 years and can manage several pieces competently. The family might sing together, harmonizing on popular songs or hymns. Mr. Henderson reads aloud from a novel, currently a serialized story by Charles Dickens that the family has been following for months. Or they might simply sit quietly, engaged in separate activities, united by shared space. Mrs. Henderson with her needlework, creating an elaborate tablecloth through countless hours of tiny stitches. Mr. Henderson reading his newspaper or a book from his library. The children with their own books or drawing or quiet games. This is the heart of Victorian domesticity. The family together in the evening, the home as refuge from the outside world, the private sphere of comfort and morality set against the public sphere of business and politics. The Victorians elevated domesticity to an ideal, particularly for women, whose proper realm was the home, whose influence was exercised through moral example and household management, rather than direct participation in public life. At 9 o'clock, the children are sent to bed. They say their good nights, kissing their parents, then ascending to their bedrooms on the top floor. They will wash, say their prayers, and sleep in their small rooms, each child alone, rather than sharing as they would in a working-class household. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson remain in the drawing room for another hour. They might talk quietly, reviewing the day, discussing household matters or plans for the coming week. The intimacy between Victorian spouses varied greatly. Some marriages were partnerships of genuine affection. Others, formal arrangements maintained more for social propriety than personal connection. But in the drawing room at evening's end, there is often a quietness, a settling, a sense of the day's duties completed satisfactorily. At 10, they retire to their separate bedrooms. Separate sleeping arrangements are standard in middle-class households, each spouse having privacy, the husband not disturbing the wife's rest with his snoring or restlessness, intimacy occurring when deliberately chosen, rather than by default of shared space. The servants work for another hour, washing dishes, banking fires, preparing the house for the next day. Sarah, the maid of all work, will not reach her attic bed until 11, and she will rise again at 5:30. Her day is long, her work is hard, but she has security, regular meals, a place to sleep, and the respectability of service in a good household. This daily rhythm continues day after day, week after week, year after year, marked by the changing seasons and punctuated by special occasions. Christmas is the greatest of these, transformed by the Victorians into the celebration we still recognize today. Imagine Christmas in this household, 1880. The preparations begin weeks in advance. Plum puddings are made in November, left to mature in their cloth wrappings. Cards are sent. The custom of Christmas cards began in the 1840s and has become universal by now. Mrs. Henderson shops for gifts, wrapping them in paper, planning the surprise of Christmas morning. On Christmas Eve, the house is decorated. Evergreen boughs are brought in, draped over mantels and door frames. Holly with its red berries, ivy with its dark leaves, mistletoe hung in doorways. The Christmas tree, a tradition imported from Germany by Prince Albert, stands in the drawing room, decorated with candles in holders, carefully supervised to prevent fire, with strings of popcorn and cranberries, with small gifts and sweets hanging from the branches, with a fairy or star at the top. Christmas morning begins with church. The family, dressed in their finest, walking together through the cold morning to the local church, which is decorated with even more greenery and filled with neighbors similarly celebrating. The service is familiar, comforting, the carols sung with genuine feeling. Then home for Christmas dinner, the grandest meal of the year. The table is extended to its full length, covered with the best white cloth, set with the best china and silver. A roast goose or turkey, stuffed and golden, is the centerpiece. There are numerous side dishes, elaborate desserts, crackers that snap when pulled, revealing small gifts and paper hats inside. The family exchanges gifts after dinner. Modest gifts by modern standards, but carefully chosen. Books, handkerchiefs, gloves, perhaps a brooch for Mrs. Henderson, a penknife for Mr. Henderson, dolls for the girls, toy soldiers for the boy. The gifts are received with genuine pleasure, exclaimed over, admired. The afternoon is devoted to games and entertainment. Charades are played, blind man's bluff, musical chairs. The children are allowed to stay up late. There is a feeling of special dispensation, of normal rules relaxed, of comfort and plenty and family unity. This is the Victorian Christmas that we have inherited, largely unchanged. The decorated tree, the exchanged gifts, the family dinner, the emphasis on home and family and children. The Victorians did not invent Christmas, but they reinvented it, transforming it from a minor religious holiday into the great domestic celebration it remains. And so the year turns, marked by its festivals and seasons, by births and deaths and marriages, by the steady rhythm of daily life. The middle-class Victorian household is a world unto itself, carefully ordered, deliberately separated from the chaos and threat of the outside world. Within its walls, specific roles are maintained, proprieties are observed, respectability is cultivated and defended. Yet this respectability, this comfort, rests on foundations that are less secure than they appear. The family's prosperity depends on Mr. Henderson's continued employment, on his health, on economic conditions beyond his control. A single reversal, a business failure, an illness, a scandal could send them tumbling down the social ladder from comfort into genteel poverty or worse. The servants who make this comfortable life possible are themselves living on the margins, their security dependent on their employer's satisfaction, their futures uncertain. They work long hours for low wages, sacrificing their own family lives to maintain the family life of others. And the gender roles, so carefully enforced, constrain as well as define. Mrs. Henderson's intelligence, her organizational abilities, her capacity for leadership, all of this is channeled into the narrow sphere of household management. She cannot vote, cannot own property in her own name. It all belongs legally to her husband, cannot pursue a profession, cannot travel alone without impropriety. Her daughters are being trained for the same limited sphere, their education designed to make them accomplished but not learned, attractive but not forward, capable of managing a household but not of participating in the wider world. Yet within these constraints there is genuine satisfaction, real comfort, true affection. The Victorian middle-class home, for all its rigidity, provides security, order, meaning. It offers a framework for daily life, a sense of purpose, a place in a comprehensible social order. Let the gaslight dim in the drawing room. Let the fire burn down to embers. Let the Victorian household settle into sleep, into dreams of continuity and respectability, of children growing and marriages made, and another generation maintaining the comfortable patterns. And so we have journeyed through a day, through a year, through decades of Victorian England. We have sat in the darkness of coal mines with children who knew nothing else. We have sailed with Franklin into the ice and watched an entire expedition slowly perish in the frozen Arctic. We have contemplated death in all its Victorian elaboration, the mourning dress, the hair jewelry, the post-mortem photographs, the séances reaching toward the departed. And finally, we have rested in the comfortable domesticity of a middle-class parlor, watching the rituals of respectability performed with precision and care. These lives, so different from our own, remind us of the vast changes that separate us from the Victorian era. You, listening now, are not trapped in darkness for 12 hours each day. You do not face the daily likelihood of disease and death. You are not constrained by the rigid social expectations that governed every aspect of Victorian life. The comfort you feel right now, the warmth, the safety, the freedom to simply rest, these are gifts that Victorian people, especially those in the coal mines or the Arctic ice, would have considered almost miraculous luxuries. Yet the Victorians were humans like ourselves. They loved and grieved and hoped. They found meaning in their rituals and comfort in their routines. They created beauty in their architecture, their arts, their elaborate customs. They endured hardships we can scarcely imagine and built the foundations of our modern world. History is not merely facts and dates, not merely the march of great events and famous names. History is the accumulation of individual days, individual lives, individual moments of suffering and joy. The trapper child sitting in darkness, the sailor dying in the Arctic cold, the widow wearing her crepe, the mother pouring tea in her drawing room, all of them lived complete lives, as real and immediate to them as your life is to you now. And now those lives are done, absorbed into the past, leaving only fragments and traces. But by contemplating those lives, by imaginatively entering their world, we honor them, remember them, allow them to speak across the gulf of years. Let the Victorian world fade now. Let the coal mines close, let the ice melt, let the mourning customs soften into memory, let the gaslit drawing rooms go dark. Return to your present moment, to your own time, to the comfort of here and now. You are not in the darkness, you are safe. The struggles of the past have ended, the rhythms of Victorian life have quieted. Rest now in the knowledge that history moves on, that hardship passes, that the darkness always eventually gives way to light. Sleep well, and when you wake, you will be in your own time, your own world, carrying with you perhaps a deeper appreciation for the comfort and freedom you possess, a greater sympathy for those who lived in harder times, a connection to the long chain of human experience that stretches back through the centuries. Good night.